The room was packed. The buzz of journalists filled the air like a swarm of restless bees. Camera lights flashed constantly, capturing every movement, every glance, every subtle reaction of those present. It was just another day of debates, interviews, and press conferences in the heart of American politics. But that day, something was about to happen, something that would be etched in the memory of those who watched. The host's voice echoed through the hall. Now we have Karoline Leavitt and Ilhan Omar live. Ladies, can we begin? The two women faced each other, like chess players analyzing the next move of their opponent. Ilhan, known for her sharp rhetoric and firm demeanor, appeared relaxed, confident. Karoline, on the other hand, maintained the composure of someone who knows exactly what she is about to do. In the first few seconds, everything seemed to follow a predictable script. Ilhan began with her usual rhetoric, talking about social justice, equal rights, structural changes. Her tone was calculated, the words carefully chosen. But on the other side of the table, Karoline simply observed, a slight smile on her face, as if she already knew what was to come. Then came the turning point. Karoline's gaze shifted, as if she had finally decided to make her move on the board. She cleared her throat, leaned slightly toward the microphone, and fired off the first line. You know, Ilhan, it's curious how you always talk about justice and democracy, but seem to forget certain details. The room fell silent for a second. Ilhan raised her eyebrows, surprised by the tone. Journalists exchanged glances, realizing that this debate had just taken an unexpected turn. The game had officially begun. Karoline continued, "You preach freedom, but defend oppressive regimes. You talk about human rights, but remain silent about ideological persecutions. You're always ready to point out others' flaws, but never admit to your own inconsistencies." Ilhan leaned forward, clearly uncomfortable. She tried to interrupt, but Karoline did not give her space. The energy in the room changed completely. It was evident from the expressions of those present that something unusual was happening. This was not just another debate. It was a clash between two irreconcilable worldviews. The cameras focused on Ilhan's face. For the first time that night, her confidence seemed to waver. With each of Karoline's statements, the weight of the words became evident. It was as if, before the audience, a veil was being lifted, exposing something many did not want to see. You like to pose as the voice of the oppressed, but what about when the victims are those who disagree with you? You cry for equality, but divide people into groups and classes, pitting them against each other. In the end, who is really fighting for freedom here? Ilhan's breathing quickened. She tried to respond, but she no longer sounded so firm. The confrontation was just beginning, and everyone there knew that this conversation would not end like the others. The audience at home watched, impressed. Comments began to pop up on social media. Clips of the moment started being shared with eye-catching titles. Karoline Leavitt exposes Ilhan Omar live. The debate was taking a different turn, and the tension was only increasing. Then, Karoline paused. She took a deep breath and concluded with a line that would leave everyone in shock. Ilhan, you can try to dodge, you can change the narrative, but the truth is one. The narrative you defend never stands up to the fact, and today, you will never recover from this. Silence engulfed the room. Ilhan blinked a few times, processing the words. The journalists, who had seemed so confident before, now murmured quietly. Something extraordinary had just happened. The camera focused on Ilhan's eyes. For the first time, her rigid posture wavered. The debate was not over, but something was already clear. Karoline had just completely dominated the narrative. The host, sensing the weight of the moment, tried to regain control. Well, that was an intense exchange of ideas. Let's now... But it was too late. The scene was already etched in everyone's mind. The political game had just changed, and this was only the first round. The impact of Karoline's words still reverberated in the room. The momentary silence was quickly replaced by a frantic murmur from the journalists, who were trying to understand what had just happened. Some whispered to each other, while others typed furiously on their phones, ready to publish the headline of the day. The confrontation was not over, but the dynamics of the conversation had already changed drastically. While Ilhan Omar tried to compose herself, social media was in a frenzy. Within minutes, excerpts of the debate were being posted on Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Karoline Leavitt destroys Ilhan Omar live, some headlines read. The truth no one expected, claimed others. But to understand the magnitude of what was happening there, it was necessary to go back a bit in time. On one side, Karoline Leavitt, a rising voice in the conservative political scene, young, articulate, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. Since entering politics, her name had been associated with a new generation of leaders who were not afraid to confront the giants of the mainstream. She stood out precisely for her incisive stance, for not backing down in the face of confrontations, and for openly challenging figures that previously seemed untouchable. On the other side, Ilhan Omar, one of the most recognized faces of the American progressive left. As a member of the so-called Squad, a group of Congress members aligned with a strongly identity-driven agenda, Omar was often seen as one of the most controversial figures in the political landscape. Her sharp rhetoric and often controversial positions constantly placed her at the center of heated debates. This clash between Karoline and Ilhan hadn't started that day. In fact, it had been brewing for months. The two had exchanged barbs on social media, criticized each other's speeches, and fueled a growing antagonism. But now, for the first time, they were face to face. And this time, the exchange of words was being broadcast to millions of people. It was impossible to ignore that, in recent months, the political landscape had become a real battleground. Discussions about censorship on social media, debates about immigration, conflicts over freedom of expression, and the limits of political correctness were at their peak. Both sides knew that this debate was not just a clash between two public figures, but rather a reflection of the increasing polarization in society. For Karoline, this was a golden opportunity. She knew that every word spoken on that stage could solidify her position as an influential voice within the conservative movement. She understood that if she managed the debate well, she could dismantle one of the biggest icons of the progressive left in prime time. And that was exactly what she began to do. When Ilhan Omar finally took the floor again, she tried to turn the tables. With a serious and calculated tone, she began to rebut Karoline's accusations, calling her manipulative and a spreader of misinformation. She claimed that the attacks she was facing were nothing but an attempt by the right to silence women from ethnic minorities. But Karoline didn't let it go. Ilhan, you always hide behind victimhood when confronted, but that doesn't work here. The impact of the statement was immediate. Some journalists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The audience reacted with murmurs, and Ilhan's eyes sparkled with a mix of surprise and irritation. Karoline continued, now pointing to something many feared to mention: Ilhan Omar's controversial history. Let's talk about facts, Ilhan. You have made statements against Israel that have been widely condemned as anti-Semitic. You have tried to downplay terrorist attacks by saying someone did something. And in the meantime, you present yourself as the great defender of freedom. The truth is that you choose which causes to support based on political convenience. The impact was devastating. It was exactly the kind of confrontation that Ilhan wanted to avoid. Journalists knew that at that moment, the Congresswoman was facing a carefully laid trap. If she tried to counter, she could end up giving Karoline even more space to continue her offensive. If she remained silent, she would be admitting defeat. Ilhan took a deep breath. She attempted to counter-argue, claiming that Karoline was distorting her words and that the debate should be more civilized, but it was too late. The audience had already realized that Omar's narrative was beginning to crumble. As the clash continued, a phenomenon began to unfold outside that room. Public opinion was dividing in real time. While traditional media outlets were trying to frame the narrative in a way favorable to Ilhan, social media was telling another story. Comments on Twitter were dominated by hashtags like Karoline exposes Ilhan, exposed live, and Omar in the corner. Edited clips of the moment were going viral, generating heated discussions across all platforms. Within minutes, political analysis channels were beginning to broadcast live, dissecting the debate. Conservative personalities praised Karoline's courage, while figures from the left tried to downplay the incident. The clash was far from over, but Ilhan Omar had already lost something valuable that night. Her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel before the eyes of the public, and Karoline Leavitt knew that this was just the beginning. The silence in the room was deafening. Ilhan Omar, used to being in control of debates, now found herself facing an unexpected challenge. Karoline Leavitt's confident demeanor, her precise articulation, and her ability to counter arguments without hesitation were dismantling, piece by piece, the narrative carefully constructed by the Congresswoman. The audience watched, hypnotized, as the clash intensified. The cameras captured every detail: Ilhan's subtle discomfort, the attentive gazes of the journalists, the discreet smiles of some spectators who sensed that something historic was happening. Karoline took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and continued. "You know, Ilhan, for a long time, you and your crew have used the same tactics to disqualify anyone who dared to question you. You label any opinion that doesn't align with yours as hate speech. You play the identity card whenever you are confronted. But there comes a time when facts speak louder than narratives." Ilhan tried to interrupt. She raised her hand, signaling that she wanted to speak. The moderator looked at Karoline, expecting her to yield the floor, but she did not. This time, the narrative would not be dictated by the same old manual. "No, Ilhan, now it's my turn to speak. For years, you've had a free stage to distort reality and shape facts to suit your convenience. But today, that ends." The audience held its breath. Journalists exchanged glances. This was not just a debate. It was a live deconstruction of the strategy that Ilhan and her allies had been using for some time. Finally, Ilhan managed to take the floor. Her voice, once confident and proud, now carried a slight tremor. She needed to regain control of the situation. "Karoline, you can distort my words as much as you want, but the truth is that what we are seeing here is a typical attack from the far right. You are using misinformation tactics to discredit me, and that is dangerous for democracy." Karoline smiled. She had already anticipated this response. The accusation of disinformation had become a common shield in modern political debates, a convenient way to avoid discussing the real merits of the argument. Disinformation, Ilhan? You talk about disinformation, but what about your own statements? When you minimized the 9/11 attacks by saying that someone did something, when you openly attacked America's historical allies, when you ignored the persecution of Christians in various parts of the world, isn't that disinformation? The blow was direct. Ilhan Omar, visibly uncomfortable, averted her gaze for a moment. The audience noticed. The cameras captured it. Social media exploded. On Twitter, comments multiplied. Clips of the debate were posted and reposted in seconds. The headlines were provocative. Ilhan Omar caught in the act. Watch the destruction live. Karoline Leavitt exposes progressive hypocrisy like never before. The truth always wins. Omar cornered. On YouTube channels, political analysts interrupted their regular programming to comment on the debate in real time. Discussion panels emerged, with commentators divided between those trying to defend Ilhan and those celebrating Karoline's courage. The information war was in full swing, and the confrontation between the two had become more than just a debate. It was a symbol of the struggle between two completely opposing worldviews. Ilhan Omar was trying to regain her composure. Her mind was racing, searching for a way out of the situation. But Karoline was not willing to back down. She knew this was the decisive moment. "Ilhan, the problem is not just what you say, it's what you do. You present yourself as a defender of democracy, but you try to silence any voice that disagrees with you. You talk about freedom, but your rhetoric endangers those who think differently. That's not democracy. It's disguised authoritarianism." Ilhan opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. The damage was already done. Her hesitation did not go unnoticed. Then Karoline concluded with the phrase that would make history. "Ilhan, you can try to dodge, you can change the subject, but the truth is one. The narrative you defend never holds up against the facts, and today, you'll never recover from this." Absolute silence. The phrase hung in the air like an unassailable verdict. Journalists frantically took notes, while the visibly tense moderator tried to wrap up the debate before the situation spiraled even further out of control. But it was too late. The scene was recorded. Ilhan Omar's humiliation had been broadcast live to millions of viewers. As soon as the debate ended, Karoline Leavitt walked out of the room with firm steps, while Ilhan Omar remained seated, visibly shaken. Journalists rushed to capture the first reactions. At the event's exit, a reporter managed to approach Karoline and asked, "Did you expect the debate to take this turn?" She smiled and replied, "The truth always comes to light. Today was just another day for the truth." Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar avoided the journalist, trying to dodge the tough questions. Her silence spoke louder than any answer. The debate was over, but the war of narratives was just beginning. The debate had ended, but the impact of everything that happened was only just starting. Karoline Leavitt's words hung in the air like an inescapable echo, and Ilhan Omar, once an imposing figure in political debates, now found herself cornered by the torrent of reactions that exploded in real time. The press room, once filled with confident journalists, was now filled with chaotic energy. Reporters moved hurriedly, exchanging glances and whispers as they typed frantically on their laptops and phones. Television producers issued quick orders to their teams, trying to organize coverage of one of the most impactful political debates in recent times. What had seemed like just another exchange of ideas had turned into a media event of monumental proportion. Meanwhile, social media was on fire. On Twitter, hashtags like Ilhan humiliated, Karoline destroys Ilhan, and the fall of Omar shot up the trending topics. Short videos of the clash flooded TikTok and YouTube, being shared by millions around the world. Television networks quickly divided between two distinct approaches. More conservative-leaning channels praised Karoline Leavitt, highlighting her courage and her ability to confront Ilhan Omar incisively and with well-founded arguments. Today, we saw a clear demonstration of what happens when the truth is exposed without fear. Karoline Leavitt not only debated, but dismantled Ilhan Omar's hypocrisy live, declared a commentator from a conservative network. On the other hand, progressive outlets tried to downplay what had occurred. They claimed that Karoline had used aggressive debate tactics, that Ilhan Omar had been unjustly attacked, and that it was just another example of the toxic polarization in the country. Some commentators even suggested that Karoline lacked respect and that the Congresswoman deserved an apology. But the damage was already done. What had happened that night could not simply be rewritten or softened. The video of the confrontation was being shared non-stop, and any attempts to distort the facts only served to reinforce the narrative that Ilhan Omar had been exposed live and that, for the first time, she had failed to escape unscathed. Within Ilhan Omar's team, the situation was chaotic. Advisors desperately tried to control the damage, sending press releases and attempting to reverse the narrative that was taking over public debate. One of the Congresswoman's strategists was caught on a tense phone call. "We need to change the focus of the discussion. We need to show that Karoline was disrespectful. We need to bring another agenda to the spotlight before this grows even more." But it was already too late. The image of Ilhan Omar hesitating, searching for words and looking away had become a symbol of her defeat. She tried to react on Twitter, posting, "When the far right has no arguments, it resorts to personal attacks. But we will keep fighting for justice and equality." The response was immediate. In the comments, the vast majority of the audience countered her statement. "These weren't personal attacks. They were facts, Ilhan. If it was so unfair, why couldn't you respond? The truth is uncomfortable, right?" With each passing minute, her credibility seemed to plummet even further. While Ilhan Omar tried to contain the damage, Karoline Leavitt was experiencing one of the most impactful moments of her political career. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Conservative leaders, independent journalists, and heavyweights in the political sphere were reaching out to congratulate her. Interview requests were coming in from all directions, and her name became one of the most searched of the day. On Instagram, she posted a simple photo of herself at the debate, accompanied by the caption, "The truth cannot be cancelled. Thank you to everyone who values transparency and courage." The post went viral. Thousands of likes, supportive comments, and shares helped reinforce her meteoric rise as one of the most relevant new conservative figures of the moment. Ilhan Omar's defeat in that debate did not only mean a temporary embarrassment, it represented a significant shift in the way the public perceived American politics. For the first time in a long time, someone had challenged progressive rhetoric directly and without fear. Journalists began to question whether this marked a turning point in the political landscape. Was the public finally awakening to the contradictions of progressive narratives? Would Karoline Leavitt be just the first of a new generation willing to confront these discourses without hesitation? The impact of that moment would resonate in the following days. New analyses would emerge, media outlets would attempt to rescue Ilhan Omar from her public defeat, and progressive commentators would strive to shift the focus of the debate. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The narrative had changed, and nothing would be the same again. Days passed, but the impact of the confrontation between Karoline Leavitt and Ilhan Omar continued to reverberate throughout the political sphere. The clash was not only a moment of television tension, but a milestone in the ideological war dividing the United States. The clash of visions between the two politicians exposed more than their differences. It revealed to the public the real game of narratives being played behind the scenes of politics and media. Karoline Leavitt, once seen as a promising young figure within the conservative movement, was now considered an emerging leader. Her name was in every news outlet, her social media following skyrocketed, and her strong stance against progressivism became a reference for thousands of people who felt suffocated by the impositions of political correctness. Ilhan Omar, on the other hand, was facing one of the most delicate moments of her career. Although her allies and progressive media outlets tried to downplay the damage, the truth was undeniable. Her credibility had been severely shaken. For the first time, the public saw one of the leading voices of the progressive left being confronted directly, without the narrative filters of mainstream media, and she had no adequate response. Ilhan Omar's public defeat set a dangerous precedent for the progressive wing of the country. For years, figures like her had become accustomed to dictating the tone of debates without being genuinely challenged. Any opposition was quickly disqualified as hate speech, misinformation, or personal attack. But in that moment, that strategy failed. Karoline Leavitt's words exposed the contradictions of identity politics on the left. The public saw live that the slogans of social justice and equality were often just smokescreens for a discourse of power and control. Progressive media outlets spent days trying to salvage Ilhan's image. They published articles claiming that Karoline used aggressive tactics, that the young conservative did not respect the boundaries of democratic debate, and that the confrontation was a reflection of the rise of intolerance in today's political discourse. But none of that was enough to reverse the damage. Social media, faster and more organic than traditional media, had already gone viral with the exact moments when Ilhan showed herself to be without answers, without argument. The debate clips were everywhere, and each new comment from mainstream media attempting to soften the damage only reinforced the idea that they were trying to hide the truth. While Ilhan Omar dealt with the image crisis, Karoline Leavitt solidified her position as one of the leading names of the new American right. In interviews given after the debate, she reinforced what millions of people were already commenting. People are tired of manipulation. They are tired of the distortion of facts. They want leaders who speak the truth without fear, and that is exactly what I will continue to do. Her growth was meteoric. Her name was mentioned on political panels of major conservative networks. She was invited to events, and she began to be seen as a possible candidate for even higher positions in the coming years. But more than that, Karoline became a symbol of resistance against the hegemonic progressive discourse. The confrontation with Ilhan Omar was not just a clash between two politicians. It was a watershed moment that showed the public it was possible to challenge dominant narratives without fear of retribution. The blow dealt to Ilhan Omar was not enough to remove her from politics, but it severely shook her position. In the following months, she adopted a more cautious stance, avoiding direct debates with opponents and limiting her public appearances to events where she could not be confronted incisively. Her team heavily invested in campaigns to try to rebuild her image, launching videos and interviews where she presented herself as a victim of a coordinated attack from the far right. But the public did not buy this version. Ilhan Omar's credibility was no longer the same. Her speeches no longer had the same impact. The damage had been done, and she knew she would never fully recover from what happened that day. Karoline Leavitt's victory in that debate was not just symbolic. It marked a real change in the political dynamic. Conservatives began to realize that it was possible to confront the progressive left head-on, without fear of the narrative traps that had dominated debates for years. The effect was immediate. Other right-wing figures started to adopt firmer stances, directly confronting those who had previously seemed untouchable. Social media became the main battleground, where videos of the debate continued to be shared as proof that a new political era was beginning. Political analysts predicted that this event would be remembered as the moment when the American right realized it could reclaim space in the public debate without needing to ask for permission from the mainstream media. The confrontation between Karoline Leavitt and Ilhan Omar was not just a debate. It was a symbol of the struggle between two irreconcilable worldviews. On one side, a young conservative politician, determined to expose the contradictions of the progressive narrative. On the other, one of the most emblematic figures of identity left, who for the first time found herself without answers in front of an attentive and critical audience. What happened that day could not be undone. The videos would continue to circulate, analyses would continue to be made, and the impact of that clash would continue to shape the political landscape in the following years. But above all, that moment proved something fundamental. The truth, no matter how much they try to silence it, always finds a way to be heard. Now I ask you, after all this, do you still believe in the narratives they are trying to push on you? Are we finally seeing a turn in politics? If you believe that the truth needs to be told without fear, share this video now. The more people watch, the more this message spreads. Comment below. Who won this clash? Did Karoline Leavitt put Ilhan Omar on the spot? We want to know your opinion. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay updated on everything the mainstream media tries to hide from you. Here, the truth always comes to light. See you in the next video.